Our class, welcome to today's class. Today I will be speaking to you about multicultural competencies, what it means to be a competent therapist. Since you guys are training to become therapists in a multicultural environment, community, society like the United States, it is critical that you learn some competencies. So, speaking of multicultural competencies, when you hear the word competency, what comes to your mind? A therapist that is culturally competent. What does that mean?
Understand, knows what they're doing, knows how to apply.
Has some
Knowledgeable.
expertise or knowledgeable.
Okay. So what drives this thinking? This understanding? Culture comes first or the competencies come first? What drives what?
It should be both, because it's an understanding of the competences of counseling in light of the client's culture.
Okay.
So you're adjusting back and forth.
Okay. So, okay. Okay, now, researchers have established ethical issues, as they have found out that ethical issues within our culture drive the need for therapists to learn and obtain competencies. And so we're going to be looking at some of the ethical problems that we face as therapists in our society that require us to learn some of these competencies. Now, as therapists, we face ethical issues. Now, there's a serious moral vacuum, according to research, that exists in delivery of cross-cultural counseling and therapy services because the value of the dominant culture have been imposed on the culturally different consumer. Cultural differences complicate the definition of guidelines even for the conscientious and well-intentioned counselor and therapist. And so, what does that mean for you as a therapist?
Good intentions are still not going to solve the problem. But there is some knowledge, some skills that we have to have that will help us transcend good intentions, even when you have the best desire to help.
For me, it means that there have been practices put in place based on the majority culture. What works for the majority culture that are being implemented with minority that don't work because they're different. And so when we try to implement something that works here, might not necessarily work over here. Because people have different values, different customs, and so it becomes dysfunctional to them, or like you said that with the Cuban, you came out
Let's be honest.
as histrionic because they were using a measure that didn't accurately measure who he was, just as culture.
Yeah. And so that is based on the vacuum that exists in the delivery of cross-cultural counseling. It does. Because the moral, ethical values of a society are based on what?
Culture.
On culture. And what is the culture?
Majority.
The majority. That's the reality. Now, and that is for therapists. That's what we have to understand. That we're standing in the middle, in the gap between clients and the dominant culture. Now, if you are a lawyer and you are hired by an assumed or presumed or assumed perpetrator, in our society, usually, legally, you are not guilty until what?
Proven guilty.
And so what happens is that the lawyer would have to hold the hands of the government. You hold it at bay. He's not guilty. So you're gonna have to wait, you're gonna be free until proven guilty. That same thing doesn't happen in other countries. Once you've been arrested, accused of an offense, straight to jail. Because there is no justice. In our country, when it comes to legal matters, we're pretty good at making sure that the accused are not treated as guilty until proven guilty in the court of law. That doesn't happen with psychotherapy or counseling, because the culture and the values, they're not the same. They are based on one particular dominant culture, and therefore we take this prism that was developed by the dominant culture and we'll look at your issues through that particular prism. And so for you as a therapist, you have to advocate. Your job is kind of advocacy. You look at the dominant culture, you look at the client, and you weigh out what works for you. That is very, very important. And that's why they're saying it's a serious moral vacuum. Research is saying, see, I did say that. It's a serious moral vacuum that exists in the delivery of cross-cultural counseling. And I think it's very important for us as therapists to understand that, so that we can be able to do a good job. Because as we are taught, we took the oath to take care of clients. That's our job. It's not my place when a client sits before me. It's not my place, it's their place. And therefore it's very important that I understand some of the cultural issues that may be able to interfere with the treatment. Now, the provision of professional services to persons of culturally diverse backgrounds by persons not competent in understanding and providing professional services to such groups shall be considered what? Unethical. Yeah, it's, if I don't understand Maria's culture, and I'm her therapist, and I don't understand her culture in light of the dominant culture, research says that's unethical in my part to make an assumption and go ahead and treat Maria. That's literature. That's what we need to be coming in terms with. But we don't think about these things. So, what do you think about that quote? That unethical argument that if you're seeing somebody that you're not quite familiar with their culture, that it's unethical.
It makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I have found that.
It's a dilemma too, because what if there aren't more culturally competent therapists in the area, but somebody needs to sit with somebody, somebody needs counseling services, so it creates a tough situation from that perspective.
See, for me, I think that when I do therapy is just because I see you as, oh, you look like me, you must be like me, you must have the same values. I try not to do that because that's not the case.
No.
Just because, we're both Hispanic, we have totally different, right?
Yes, we do.
Different,
Everything.
and so just because you two are,
Like, I am not like you.
and so,
And she's not like you.
and so even between, African Americans, we talk about just people from all over the world. So the assumption for me is that I want to learn as much as I can about you. In my intake, when I do an intake, I ask all kinds of questions. I ask you about your sports, I ask about your religion, I ask about, who do you go to, who did you go to when you were a child? Because I want to get as much information from you. I want to know who you are, so that I'm able to then formulate, conceptualize.
Yeah. And multicultural research that, in responding to your statement, says that because the client comes from the same cultural background, doesn't necessarily mean that you understand them. And if you make an assumption to be comfortable with that particular client, it is called over-identification. You're overly identifying with the client, which negates and also may neutralize your effectiveness because you're overly associated with the client. You know, research also says that, you know, clients from the same cultural background usually don't, even though they may prefer a client from the same background, the treatment is not as effective. So African Americans report that they get better treatment from Caucasians. Caucasians report that they get better treatment from African Americans. That's what research says. So it's amazing that people from other cultures get better treatment from folks from the other cultures. That's what research says, but it's kind of hard to believe that. You know?
Yeah, because that's kind of sounds contradictory to
Yeah.
what the previous statement said, that because different cultures, so we treat, but the previous quote said that it's not that's not the case.
What neutralizes effectiveness is the over-identification. Because kind of body, you're from we're from the same race. There's also a lot of animosity that is transferred between people of the same culture.
Yeah.
Assumptions, animosity, which also affects the process in a negative way.
Yeah, one paper that I read said that African Americans tend to see white counselors as better trained than an African American counselor.
And yeah,
And that's one of the reasons why they report a better result, because they're expecting more than they would from an African American.
and white clients report that African American therapists are better than white therapists.
Yes. For the same reason.
For the same reasons. It's amazing.
Probably because they feel like they're, again, not having assumptions imposed on them, that there's more questions, more dialogue,
Yeah.
more open-mindedness, you know, that beginner's mind kind of attitude.
Thank you guys for that. Okay. What research says? Both of these quotes make it clear that professionals without training or competence in working with clients from diverse cultural backgrounds are unethical and potentially harmful, which borders on the violation of human rights. In 1981, both AACD 1981 and APA published ethical guidelines making it imperative for counselors and therapists to have some sort of formal training on cultural differences. And, you know, it goes without saying that if we're going to be effective, we're going to have to do that. Okay, counseling and social political reality. Therapists need to recognize an important factor that the profession of counseling oftentimes reflect the values of the larger society. What do y'all think?
In my experience, it does. Your values will not be respected because you're expected to be within the framework of what the larger society has set up for you. So it creates a conflict.
It does. So you coming from the other side of the society, how does it make you feel when you're going to see a counselor
You
that
know-
doesn't come from your race?
You know that it's already going to be a problem
Okay.
because the solutions by means of the interpretations that they're going to apply, they're not cross-cultural. And I've had both. I've had culturally trained and those who were not. Those who were not culturally trained immediately made all sorts of assumptions. For example, one of them said, well, you're Hispanic, so you must beat your wife. This is when I was getting divorced. You must have married her because you needed a green card. So it was all of these things that he was throwing in the counseling process. When I went to see one that was culturally well trained, none of these issues arose, and it finally enabled us to arrive at a decision of divorce without any bias or animosity
Mhm.
from the counselor.
Now, counseling is referred to as the handmaid of the status quo and transmitters of social values, indicating the potential social political nature of counseling. When you hear that, and how does that make you feel? When you are, especially when you're receiving a client from the other group, minority group, how does it make you feel as a counselor?
Well, it's a big responsibility. It feels stereotypical. The handmaid of the status quo. Like there is, again, just automatic those assumptions and stereotypical mindset that's entering into the room. And that I'm the one carrying it. Am I reading that right?
Right, that's what the therapist is the one doing it.
When you're not aware of that, it's very easy because then right and wrong becomes centered on what the person who is doing in the position of authority believes is to be right and wrong. So again, it shapes the movement in a certain direction.
And you just said the person in the position of authority. And
Yeah.
we know because we've
We do,
trained that
yeah.
we're not in a position of authority in that space, but maybe people coming into the space
They feel
feel
that way.
like, feel like we are.
They do.
I would take it a step farther. This is nothing new. If you go back to the founders of psychology, Freud referred to women who showed emotion as hysterical,
Yeah.
and that's where that term came
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
And it was used, golly, up in, probably still used, but by men. I mean, going through divorce, it was nothing to have your wife put into the mental hospital saying that she had lost her mind or was hysterical, and you could do it very easily. Because once you've been accused
Yeah.
of having a mental problem, you're guilty until proven innocent. We've seen this with people who are, in poverty or in different disadvantaged areas across the societal spectrum, where they have been, to some degree disenfranchised. So I think it is a cultural issue. It's a socioeconomic issue. It's a gender issue. It's a lot of, different, when there's different societal shifts of power, it can happen across a lot of spectrums, and I think that's where, the multicultural diversity
Yeah.
piece needs to be so inclusive, because, you don't only have one diversity factor. You have many diversity factors, it's not just race, it's race, gender, socioeconomic
Yeah.
class, it's educational
Plethora,
levels.
it's a
It's a
plethora.
lot of it,
Yeah.
trauma victims.
Yeah, one thing that she said, Tiffany said is correct. At Columbia, just a few years ago, did a state museum exhibit. They were tearing down the old state hospital. And in the attic, they found hundreds and almost thousands of suitcases of the patients that had come into the facility. What they discovered in retrospect was that the state was making money by getting people from New York City that were being committed and left there for life. When they reviewed the cases, because everything was there in these suitcases, was that these were primarily European immigrants who did not know English, that had had some run-in with the police or the authorities, or families didn't want them. And some doctor had said they're suffering from this and this because they can't communicate, or they're exhibiting some odd behavior. And these people that were otherwise perfectly normal and healthy, but because of the culture, were
Yes, sir.
being put in the internment in these facilities.
Right.
Yeah. When there's a moral vacuum,
Yes.
that's what people do. That's how we treat folks.
And they said that they really didn't find the review that they did of the cases, they never found anybody who really merited to be there.
Yeah.
So,
It is sad, but these conversations are needed. we need to have conversations as professionals because people are coming to us from everywhere. Competency it's not debatable. It's, you gotta be competent. And multiculturalism is not just about whites and blacks, it's Hispanics and Asians, it's gay, lesbians, females, it's, yeah.
And as I said before, I'm guilty of that as much. I once had a case of a Cuban person that was brought to me, oh, you're Cuban, you should be able to work with them. And I found out that person and my culture were so far apart
Yeah,
that had they brought in a Chinese, and I'm just saying that,
Yeah.
to talk to her at that time, he probably would have done better than I did.
absolutely. You see,
Yep.
a competent counselor. What does culturally competent counselor look like? What does a culturally competent counselor look like?
There's no particular look.
Do they have look?
Not physical.
No, not
physical.
physical, no.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't. If you had to choose a counselor, which one would you choose and why?
One that I can afford.
Yeah, we are laughing, but that's true.
Yeah.
To a degree, that's true. And people make decisions based on affordability. Can I afford this particular counselor? They don't look into, are they competent? Do they know what they're doing? Do they know what they're talking about? Am I going to be safe with them? Those kind of questions. They just don't know. So they come to us. It's our responsibility that we take care of them when they come. And so, now, a culturally competent counselor is one that is actively in the process of becoming aware of his or her own assumptions about human behavior, values, biases, preconceived notions, and personal limitations. It doesn't say anything about, our physical looks, our appearances. It's intrinsic. It's all internal. It's all internal. And it's a journey. It is a process. In fact, it's a lifelong process. Competency is a lifelong process. It's not when you have a license, it's not about 10 years or 20 years. And we live in a society that is always changing. It's unbelievable. And so, that completes my presentation. Thank you for your contributions. Keep it in.